Geek Tank Radio on 98.1 The Max.
Welcome, everyone. We are the Geek Patrol, and our microphones don't have a stun setting. I'm Joe Thorderson, here with my friends Allan Gilbreth and our buddy Max over there behind the glass. And sitting in for the absent Alyssa Diggs and Brandon Olmsted is our good buddy Danny Chamberlin. Danny, you wear many hats. I don't know. How do you want to be introduced here today?
Today I'm a maker.
Okay, he's here with the he's here representing the Mid-South Makers, which is if you haven't been over there, it's over in Bartlett. Nice little setup you got there, man. So Danny's going to be set up. The Mid-South Makers are pretty regular guests of the Memphis Comic and Fantasy Convention, which, of course, is coming up November 23rd and 24th. It's right around the corner, folks. And while we're at it, get your tickets at memphiscfc.com. Lots of fun stuff going on. We're going to be at the University of Memphis Holiday Inn all weekend. But, hey, Danny, let's give the elevator pitch. What do people need to know about the Mid-South Makers if they've never heard of it?
So the Mid-South Makers is an organization to it's made up of creatives of all stripes, artists, computer geeks, robot builders. We've got luthiers. It is people who have one thing in common: they like making.
Right.
The problem is sometimes when you're making, the tools you need are expensive, large, and loud. And not all of us have the money or the space to have a Powermatic table saw that can break down 4x8 sheets of plywood, or a mill, or a lathe, or a large laser cutter. And so we provide members have access to all this type of equipment, and they have access to it 24/7. And so it's a collaborative community where we share our knowledge and our different skills. If someone doesn't know how to weld, we've got a couple of metal workers that'll show them how to run a bead. And so it's a community of people wanting to make things. Ultimately,
I've been to some of your open houses. It's a very eclectic bunch. Allan, you know the type. I mean, but I always like the creative types, and plus, like you said, they're not interested in just sitting around. They want to do things. They want to make something unique. And it's funny all the residual knowledge and skills you pick up when you just hang out with these people. So,
one of our members described it as we're hobby collectors. We don't collect things. We collect hobbies. Someone will get interested in something, and it'll infect the rest of the group in a good way, and we'll all start picking it up and learning and sharing, and soon everybody's doing it. That's how 3D printing got started, drones, and things like that. One person got into it, or two people got into it, and spread the knowledge throughout the group.
Yeah, because it probably looks a lot different than it would have 30 years ago. We didn't have 3D printers, and we didn't have laser engravers at our disposal.
Didn't have CNC machines.
It would have basically been
stuff.
it would have probably been a wood and metal shop, right, back in the day.
Probably some kind of co-op.
That's what's weird to me is all the mixture of technology and classic woodworking stuff. I mean, there's an app for Is there an app for a table saw yet? I mean,
well,
you know what I mean?
We'll see.
Okay.
Actually, Joe, I'll tell you, the answer is yes.
I was going to say, I'm trying to think of what
I know
it is,
there's some calculators out there.
Well, actually, I'm going to be skinning a bunch of reclaimed lumber.
Oh.
And there is actually an app for how much wood do I need to take off to get the old paint away and have a new surface.
Really?
Yeah.
With a table saw?
Yep.
You better have steady hands, man, when you...
Well, it's more about where to put the holders so that you can slide this through and cut that 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch off.
Not to nitpick, but Danny, if you're cutting paint off with a table saw, don't you think it's going to gum up the blade? Or... I don't know.
Only one way to find out.
All right. I don't know. I don't want to use a saw after Allan's been through there. But hey,
change the blade. Oh well.
It is a cool setup, man. You guys have lots of equipment. It makes it easy because, yeah, it's basically a pretty affordable membership, right?
Yep.
You just what is the membership? If
So for individuals, it's $45 a month. And again, like I said, that is 24/7 access. You get a little key fob, and you got access to all of our equipment. The really spinny, dangerous stuff you do have to be checked out on. But once you're checked out and we say you can use it, you can use any of the equipment. We have leftover materials from other projects that you can dig through and use for your projects. I mean, we've got wood, plastic, we've got parts, we've got robot parts, printer parts, all kinds of things that members can use in their projects. Because one of the things we believe in is right to repair. If you got something broke, you should be able to fix it. In upcycling, reusing stuff that's already there, there's no point in contributing to the mess when you can make something to take advantage of leftover. Our table saw is a perfect example. It's a Powermatic 65 that one of our members restored. He got a great deal on it. It's from 1965, but it's as pristine as the day it was made because he took the time in to make it, restore it, repaint it, and everything.
Well, a lot of that old stuff too, Alan. It's like there's no extra bells and whistles, so it is kind of just the nuts. It's just the basic components. So if you fix them, it's gonna just go forever.
My favorite tools in my arsenal are all reclaimed tools. Most of them are over 80 years old.
Yeah, they'll hold up. I mean, look what they're made out of.
Oh, yeah.
Cast iron, a motor, and a spinning blade, right? I mean,
one of my favorite saws is a hand saw Sears.
Yeah.
Circa about 1905.
Hey, Danny, we're going to hit a break. Before we do, how do people get in touch and find out about the Mid-South Makers?
They can go to midsouthmakers.org. And there's information about the makers. We also have a Discord server, and there's a link to the Discord. And come out and see us and drop in and chat. And we're always willing to share the knowledge that we have.
And check out the open houses. They're a lot of fun. So we're going to continue visiting with Danny and find out what he's going to be bringing to the Memphis Comic and Fantasy Convention.
You're listening to Geek Tank Radio on 98.1 The Max. We'll see who's laughing once the Velociraptor eggs hatch. The Geek Patrol is back.
And we'll come back to... I don't think my mic's on, Max. And we'll come back... Is my mic on?
Yes.
All right.
You're just
I guess leave it in. I'm not hearing it at all. Oh, now I hear it. I didn't turn my volume up. And we'll come back to Geek Tank Radio, everybody. Max will get rid of that in post.
No, I won't.
I'm Joe Thorson here with my friends Alan Gilbreth and our buddy Max over there behind the glass, and sitting in for Alyssa Diggs and Brandon Olmstead is our good buddy Danny Chamberlin, former chief of staff. Is that chief of staff or con head, whatever you want to call it?
I was president of Memphis Science and Fiction Conventions Incorporated, and I was also chairman of the actual Mid-South Con Convention Committee.
Right. So we travel in the same circles basically, but also Danny's here representing the Mid-South Makers. It occurred to me, Alan, I never even set the table in the first segment. This isn't the only thing we're going to talk about today. A little later in the show, you and I want to chime in on this a little bit if we can. We want to talk about Miyazaki.
Yes, we do.
Max, I know you are a devotee of Miyazaki, and I have sort of, just an interesting, outside opinion about Miyazaki that I wanted to get in on, but there's no denying the man's talent and the man's artistry at all. So we're gonna talk about that. But before that, Danny, we were talking about the Mid-South Makers. It's really a great organization, and it's pretty centrally located for most people. You're over in Bartlett, not the way northern part of Bartlett, pretty much just, the center of Bartlett, I guess.
Yeah, we're on Bartlett Road between Sycamore View and Stage.
And if you want to work, like let's suppose, like Danny was saying earlier, you're somebody that wants to work with tools, or maybe you want to learn about how to use a 3D printer or a laser engraver or some equipment you've never used before. Well, instead of going out and buying it, you can join this basically a community of creators very affordably. It's like $45 a month. Not only do you get use of all the equipment 24 hours a day, you get you get access to all the knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of these creators. So, but hey, Danny, you guys do a lot for the community too, don't you? You were telling us something off the air I don't know how you pulled it off, but pretty impressive.
So, one of our goals is community outreach. We love to share our knowledge and our abilities. One of this idea for helping the community came into play during COVID. Once COVID hit, because the supply chain was not ready for the crush of people needing personal protective equipment, the maker community, both in Memphis and at large globally, stepped up. Someone came up with a design for a face shield that was easy to print and easy to assemble. So we all started, everyone who had 3D printers started cranking them out. And locally in Memphis, the Mid-South makers, in a 12-week period, we made 77,000 face shields and distributed them to the medical community and the first responders in the area.
That's pretty impressive, man. Who paid for it all?
It was volunteers.
Wow.
We this was all a volunteer effort. We sourced the plastic. I think we did get some donation of plastic from one of the companies, but generally it was mostly us.
Huh. That's pretty impressive, man. Now you're making me feel inferior and not. No, that's pretty cool, though, man. I'm trying to imagine how you crank out 77, but I know you made multiples at a time, right?
Yeah.
Like stacks of them. So that's the kind of work they do. So, I mean, there is a good vibe over there. How often do you guys do your open houses? Because that's really a good way to get introduced to it.
We have open house every Friday night from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And it's completely free and open to the public, and they can come out and we'll give you a tour of the space, let you take a look and see what we've got, and explain to you how things work. And we would love to have anybody.
It's really cool, man. And like we said, it's very affordable, and it's a nice workshop. I will say one thing I like: it's well lit. Everything's laid out and organized, and it seems like people clean up after themselves.
Yes.
I guess that's a rule, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you're not. No slobs allowed, basically.
And so, and we also have other events as well. So we have as far as the community outreach. For instance, like next Saturday, we're having a 3D printer clinic. If you've got a 3D printer, don't know how it works, or want to learn more, or it's busted, bring it out. It's at 1 p.m. next Saturday at the Makerspace, and then again, it's free and open to the public. And we have a lot of things like that. We have workshops. We did a cosplay workshop for making props out of BBA foam. We've had a sewing class. And we're getting ready to have a welding class coming up. I'm not sure when. That's still in the planning stages. But we do a lot of these things for the community so they can, so we can share our knowledge.
You know, it's funny. Cosplayers will use all of that. They'll weld. They'll do woodworking. They'll do they do it all. So they're some of the best craftspeople out there. But hey, speaking of that, Danny, what are you guys bringing to the Memphis Comic and Fantasy Convention? Because you'll have a promo table.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I know we're bringing a 3D printer, and we'll have some of the things we print. And I haven't decided what projects we're gonna have there, but we're gonna have some of the things that we build. Maybe a bot, a combat bot of some kind, small one, not giant ones on battle bots. But
I hope they're gonna be deactivated, Danny. I don't want to get sued, man. No wrecking the hotel.
We'll see.
Okay, all right. But that's going to be fun. And your booth is always fun, man, and you give things away sometimes, too. That's what's cool. So get over to the Memphis Comic and Fantasy Convention. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's our 14th annual, so there's a lot going on. And that's one of the nice things. If you're new to conventions, all the different, every type of geek is represented, and it's a lot of fun. It's a great shopping experience. And of course, you can come and meet our celebrity guest, Brandon Potter, well-known anime voice actor from One Piece and video game actor. And, of course, he plays Quintus from The Chosen, which is a huge show. If you want to get your tickets, go to memphiscfc.com. And actually, there's a promo code. If you use the word chosen, all in capital letters, you get a 33% discount. How do you like that? It expires November 15th. But, Danny, we're looking forward to seeing you over there, man. It's going to be great. Make sure you get in touch with the Mid-South makers. It really is a great, it's a great vibe over there.
Yep.
Nice workshop and everything. So, all right, you guys, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Miyazaki.
You're listening to Geek Tank Radio on 98.1 The Max. The Geek Patrol is back.
And welcome back to Geek Tank Radio, everybody. I'm Joe Thorderson here with my friends Allan Gilbreth and our buddy Max over there behind the glass, and sitting in for Brandon Olmsted and Alyssa Diggs, who, unfortunately, Alyssa's got a little bit of a after effects of, I don't know what she's got. She was out trick-or-treating with her niece or something, and it was drizzly and cold and rainy. I guess she picked up something. So, Alyssa, get better. Hope to see you next week.
It's going around a lot today.
But sitting in is our buddy Danny Chamberlin from the Mid-South Makers, former chief of, head of the of Mid-South Con, and just one of our buddies here that he's sort of a staple at the Memphis Comic and Fantasy Convention. But hey, we're shifting gears, you guys. Max, I know you were excited about this topic. In fact, you brought it up last week, and we said, "No, this topic needs more time to unpack." So
allow me to give a little context for.
Okay.
And now, a legend in geekdom.
I think that's fair.
I would definitely say.
Okay.
But what prompted this discussion was I was talking about the fact that I had recently seen the newest Miyazaki film, The Boy and the Heron, and it might be his swan song, one of his final films and everything, or so they say. And there was just something very fascinating about his work. Like, you were saying that even if you didn't necessarily, I'll just allow you to give your opinion on it.
I will but go ahead and, Max, I always feel like it's important, there's always new generations coming along to just tell people who Miyazaki is.
So
in case they don't know.
Hayao Miyazaki is a famous anime movie director, creator, and he's been around way past, since the 70s, 80s, well into today as well. But he's known for famous films, for the famous production studio Studio Ghibli, and he's created such works as Spirited Away. Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind is my favorite, and it's also one of his earliest. And it's also one that was adapted that he had created into a manga, so it just shows how much of an influence and effect Nausicaa had on him. But he's always been known to, I kind of consider him, in terms of his style, sort of like the Walt Disney of anime.
That's probably fair. And he's they're drawing this stuff, right, Allan? This is we're not talking computerized. Why are you giving me that evil look?
No, because
classic animation.
We are talking the true hardcore pencil, paper, laminates, transparencies. You're talking about the true old school of art, and he has been I'm going to say celebrated and accused of having a soft pen.
What does that mean?
His characters are not harsh.
Right.
There's
right.
of two things that he loves to do. He loves things that fly.
It seems like every movie's got
Every
somebody
movie,
flying.
there's something that flies, and he is incredibly good at feathers.
Yeah.
And that is not easy. When you take a moment and you look at a still cell of any of his work, and you begin looking at the backgrounds and the detail, and you realize there's so much more going on in this scene. In an average anime, generally if you have some form of action, whatever is happening in the background is usually blurred
Out
at
of focus.
best.
That's funny. You're right, man.
It's just not of any interest because you're supposed to be watching center stage. That is not true by Ghibli Studio standards. when you go back and you look at these cells, I mean, honestly, look at each individual cell like its own piece of artwork. And they do not back off in the production of the background. And that means you get a very full experience. It's a much more live movie experience than an anime experience.
Okay, but Alan, here's the thing. I almost think it's beyond that, because even in a movie, a lot of times whatever they're not focusing on, they don't want you to focus on it. So
Right.
the background might be blurry.
Exactly.
This is more like a painting, like you said. Individual paintings moving before
living
your
painting,
eyes.
right? And then you get into, we'll pick on like his big three. Spirited Away. Spirited Away is to a non-Asian fan is a master class in Asian storytelling and Asian mythology.
What do you mean by that?
Storytelling takes different routes. Max and I were discussing earlier a little bit of another one of an artist we like that is really into horror.
Junji Ito.
Junji Ito loves to do horror, and one of his big things is how many ways can we fold, mutilate, or spindle my victim?
You're not wrong. I saw a little
If
of
you've
that,
ever seen one of his movies,
Uzumaki.
you will have to admit you never understood spindle and mutilate till you've watched one of his movies and you go, oh, so that's what that looks like.
Right.
Of very different storytelling attributes, because a lot of times, like a horror film, you're moving very fast. You've got a lot to get done. You don't have a lot of room to get it done in. You go watch Spirited Away, and you now have 3 full hours of slow-moving story, but yet you don't feel like the story is moving slowly.
And I'll also say this too, a lot of his movies are, I think this sort of storytelling device is really interesting. They don't necessarily have a definitive conclusion. It's almost like the story continues even after the film is done. Like Kiki's Delivery Service is another example of that. It's like they have like a climactic scene, but the story still continues. It's like, all right, Kiki continues her work as a witch with her new buddy who's developing a flying machine. Flying machine again.
That's interesting that you say that, because, there isn't this sense of,
Well,
and they all lived happily ever after the end. You don't really get that.
it's more like you just got to watch in this window for
snapshot.
right now.
Pretty interesting. And but you said something earlier on. It is paced different. It is not at all like the high energy boom 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 boom, some animes that you see.
Right.
Which takes a little getting used to. And I wonder, it's funny, but he hasn't changed for a modern audience. He paces his movies the same.
Exactly.
He hasn't compromised. So we're gonna talk more about Miyazaki when we come back here on Geek Tank Radio.
You're listening to Geek Tank Radio on 98.1 The Max. The Geek Patrol is back.
Gods, leave us.
And we'll come back to Geek Tank Radio, everybody. I'm Joe Thorderson here with my friends Allan Gilbreth and our buddy Max over there behind the glass. And sitting in for the absent Alyssa Diggs and Brandon Olmstead is our buddy Danny Chamberlin from the Mid-South Makers. And, well, you do a lot, Danny, and we're just going to say that for now. Former Mid-South Con chairman and chairman, what is that, a member emeritus?
Board member emeritus.
Okay,
of the
it
board
sounds
of
very
directors.
fancy. It basically it means you get a lot of free. You got to do a lot of free labor to keep that thing going.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And before the break, we were talking about Miyazaki, which I'm glad we've got a little extra time to unpack this today. But Max, you had wanted to chime in about something.
Well, you were saying he hasn't really changed. It's more like the world has changed around him. That kind of makes me think of the idea of like his art style too. You told me that you didn't necessarily know whether or not you liked him or didn't like him, and that's in part because of his art style.
Well, here's what I'll say about that, Max. So I've encountered Miyazaki in my own home. Somebody will be watching Miyazaki because my son happens to be a big Miyazaki fan, and so what'll happen is he's watching whatever it might be, and I wasn't even intending to sit down and watch it, but I find myself being drawn in, and I find the images very compelling, and I find his pacing really interesting. Where It's kind of like you said, Alan. It's like a moving painting. Every image in there, it's a really small thing, but what was the movie where the girl's flying the broom or something?
Kiki's Delivery Service.
So I'm watching, and there's this little scene where she flies off in the broom, and to me it went on about 15 seconds longer than a normal cartoon would have done, and it was really, I don't know why. I'm like, I really like what he's doing here. He's not rushing. He's letting you appreciate, wow, this person is flying on a broom. This person is, and so I guess what I would say is I find his work very compelling. The only thing that's off-putting to me, some of his characters are genuinely just creepy looking, and even some of them, they're not villains. They're just
like the heron.
There's a dude that was part bird. And
the heron.
And he's got a big, weird red nose. He was
voiced by Robert Pattinson, your favorite Batman.
They remind me of the classic Grimm's fairy tale. I'm talking the old original one where the kids really do get eaten by, whatever. And I find that a little creepy, but I also find it compelling. I don't know. The guy makes his stand. He said, "This is my story I'm telling," and I really respect that a lot, man. But
stories are not always linear. And stories are not always pretty. And I'll pick on the animated version of Lord of the Rings.
I was gonna bring that up, or The Hobbit.
Yes, I was gonna pick on the old rotoscope.
When there's a whip.
I hate when I'm thinking like Allan. Allan, that was exactly the one I was thinking. Bilbo and those guys look weird.
Well, it's
and Gandalf, you don't want to go off with him on an adventure.
But that was exactly it, because there was a description that said, "So, I feel fair, but yet I appear foul. And if I were truly foul, I would appear more fair."
Oh, that's interesting.
And that was a Aragorn line that has stuck with me in animation all along. And it's like many of the characters and I'll pick on Spirited Away because that's probably the one everybody knows best. That or Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah.
There are so many characters in there that are just simply that character.
Yeah.
And they're there for that scene. Now, does that scene necessarily propel the story forward? Not at a great pace. But you need to see how something is done because it's going to be important in an hour.
Right.
How do they fill the bathtub for a monster? How do you bathe a monster? How do you, well, the monster doesn't think of itself as a monster. The monster thinks of itself as a client. But you don't get to see that in the average rushed American style movie.
Okay, go ahead. Danny, what's your favorite one? I mean, you're a fan, right?
Yeah. My favorite's probably Spirited Away. But as far as Miyazaki goes, one of the things that you also have to remember, I think he's one of the last active creators that was directly shaped by Hiroshima and Nagasaki in post-war Japan. There's not too many of them left, and I think he's one of the last. So there's a lot of that informs the stories that he tells.
Especially the movie Grave of the Fireflies.
Yes.
That's literally him talking about two orphan children affected by the carpet and fire bombings of World War II.
Yeah, he's very much outspoken about that
Very
stuff,
anti-war.
Yeah, well, I don't blame him.
And all of his characters are go-getters.
It's speaking of war, though, you guys, it's funny the things that Miyazaki reminds me of, some of his stories. Did you guys see, Max, I know you saw that movie, 1917. It was it was out, 4 or 5 or so years ago. It's that World War I movie where the entire movie is one take. Like, you're following this handheld camera, and it's a journey. It's a really interesting movie. And not every part of that movie is fast-paced. Sometimes they're just walking and they're going down a path. And Miyazaki reminds me of that. I always feel like I've been on a journey, and it is an escape. Some things you watch with partial attention and you're not really absorbed. I will say the guy, he ropes you in. You become part of that world.
And all the characters have a certain level of purity, or to where you're, even if they're antagonists, you're still sort of rooting or interested on what they're doing.
Yeah, which is always important.
Like Porco Rosso is a good example. There's this teenage pilot mechanic that was helping Porco Rosso, and she actually like flew along with him, and she was like very engaging, very charismatic, and also like she was able to convince like these rough and tumble pirates and everything, and kind of like speak to their sense of honor. It's kind of fascinating.
You know what else I like? Gosh, I'm really heaping a lot of praise on Miyazaki because I was sort of indifferent when I first encountered Miyazaki. But
right.
I do like the fact that he doesn't hold your hand either. Like,
no.
You might be watching a movie and you're like, okay, wait, what does this character have to do with anything? He's not telling you. By the end of the movie, you're like, oh, that was that person. Oh, and then so suddenly you know,
I always looked at becoming a Miyazaki fan is the second or third time you've seen it.
That's interesting.
That is the first time you see one of these films because it is definitively not a mass market. It's designed to tell a story.
All right. Well, we're going to heap some more praise on Miyazaki when we come back here on Geek Tank Radio.
You're listening to Geek Tank Radio on 98.1 The Max. The Geek Patrol is back.
We better not risk another frontal assault. That rabbit's dynamite.
And welcome back to Geek Tank Radio, everybody. I'm Joe Thorderson here with my friends Allan Gilbreth and our buddy Max over there behind the glass, and our pal Danny Chamberlin sitting in for the absent Brandon Olmsted and Alyssa Diggs. And if you're just tuning in, we've had a nice conversation today about Miyazaki, the great anime. Is it? I guess it is anime. I don't know. He's a classic animator, very well-known storyteller from Japan. But Allan, before the break, you said something, and it really got me thinking about something. I think you said you don't necessarily become a fan of his work on the first viewing. You have to sort of. Well, I want to. It's funny you say that because back in the 80s. You know, when U2 was coming up, they were a big band. Well, I'm sorry, they were one of my favorite bands of all time. And I specifically remember the Joshua Tree and Octung Baby, those two albums that are really probably two of their biggest albums. When those albums came out, I did not, on the first listening, I didn't like them. And I'll even say that about like some Led Zeppelin albums. I didn't like them. Then I listened again, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool guitar hook. And then by about the third time, I was hooked, and I couldn't stop listening, and I loved them. Why is that? Is it because they're just throwing something so different at us that... Because in my opinion, every song on the Joshua Tree is great. I love that album, but I didn't like it at first. I don't understand that. So.
Well, I think there are certain artists out there that are looking to take you on a certain trip. You got to be ready for the trip. So the first time you listen to it, maybe you're not in that mood. Maybe you're not in that headspace.
You're in your headspace, not in theirs.
You're not quite clicking, which is why there are artists that are known as breakup artists. So, you know, when you're young, you've got relationships coming and going and that kind of stuff, and you got a lot of emotional ups and downs. Well, those songs 10 years later, when your life is full and stable, don't carry the same weight.
Like the Smiths.
Yeah, the Smiths. Yeah, well, I still like their music, but they don't have the same emotional baggage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't carry the same weight.
Now they're just fun for me.
Certain movies come along, and we've got movies coming up all right, let's throw a movie on the pile here. Let's go with, it is the 40th anniversary of The Terminator.
Wow, isn't that something?
And we are still watching this movie.
Although Terminator 2 is the best
40,
one. Yeah.
Well, I'm just pointing out, 40 years ago, and 27 years later, The Fifth Element is getting another screen release.
Isn't that something? So, yep.
And The Fifth Element, the first time I saw it, I thought it was a spoof.
Yeah, you love it.
I did not like that movie. I laughed at it. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely so completely over the top.
Well,
I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah. You also had that it was almost a part. It looked like a direct rip of the first segment of the Heavy Metal movie.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. I mean, and then you go back and you find out that the director is the same guy doing La Femme Nikita. And you're going, what, were you just on really better drugs for this movie, or what was going on? So when you look at certain producers, Quentin Tarantino. I'll throw in, Mr. Miyazaki here. His work is a certain style in a certain pace for a certain mentality. If you are looking for a high energy action movie, you are not going to sit down and watch Ponyo.
Right.
If you are kind of in a cool afternoon or early evening and you're in the mood to get captured by a story, he is going to tie you to the couch.
You know what? Another word that comes to mind for Miyazaki is the word integrity. The guy, this is my story. This is my art form. This is the way I'm doing it. You like it or you don't. I'm not
exactly.
I'm not doing a bunch of market research and trying to figure out what's the next hot thing. He's just telling his story, basically.
There's plenty of good examples of artists like that. Even ones that I would say he's not necessarily controversial, but I even like artists that are have their own integrity, even if they make work that's controversial. A manga series that comes to mind for me is like Berserk, because it's horrifying, it's violent, and it's crude, but it's a man sticking to his vision, and it's a very well told story if you can get around some of the if you can get around some of the rough edges, so to say.
Yeah. I always prefer that, man.
Well, if you look at some of even the modern storytelling we're getting people kind of going back to the principles of good storytelling.
Late Night with the Devil.
That is the one I was about to
Joker
say.
movie.
Oh
You're
my
right.
gosh. Late Night with the Devil just got like a #1 rated best Halloween movie ever.
It's going to be the cult classic.
It should be.
Yeah.
And that's without us being buddies with David Desmalchin.
No, this is objective. This
is just you watch this movie and you go, this is how a movie is done right. Because that movie also is not fast paced.
No. Yeah, it sort of unfolds.
It's shockingly slow. Mm-hmm. And you can't look away because you just know it's going to happen.
Yep. No, and I'll take that all day over the well-calculated franchise that's... Because, they don't hold up, for one thing. And you just don't care.
Yeah, they lose. The formula loses.
You don't create stories by committee or calculation. You create it by genuine creativity.
Hey, real quick before we get out of here, if somebody's out there and they're like, I want to check out Miyazaki, what's the first one to look for, you guys? What's your opinion?
I would say to get into light with a familiar story, Ponyo, because it's basically the Little Mermaids, the Japanese version.
Okay.
Of Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, and then you're going to go explore all the rest of the movies.
Like Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind is my favorite because it's essentially Lord of the Rings in terms of some of its design.
And I would say treat it the way you would treat going to a movie. In other words, block out the time. Don't go, I'm going to watch 30 seconds here and a minute here or whatever,
What's nice, too, is if you get to some of his classic films, too, it feels like a classic film experience because they have, the overture at the beginning, and
Turn the lights down.
And he's one of the few animators, I guess, that still has, he's like he has his John Williams still. He has Joe Hisaishi, who's been his composer all throughout.
Yeah, no, it's very great stuff, and we would love to hear from you if you do get into Miyazaki, but not right now because we're out of time, you guys. So, but you've been listening to another fast-paced episode of Geek Tank Radio. So, but until next week, we are the Geek Patrol, and I am Joe Thorderson.
I'm Maximilian.
I'm Danny Chamberlin.
And I'm Allan Gilbreth, reminding you to really dive into a good story and let it spirit you away.
Yeah, that's pretty good.